In our previous video, we created some lighting for this scene using Viewport 2.0 and a directional and ambient light. So now we're going to create some different materials for each of our objects in order to explore how materials work inside of Maya. Let's start with our sphere. Currently, all of the scenes inside of Maya have the Lambert 1 material. This is the default material that comes with the scene when you first open it. Let's apply a different kind of material to our sphere. To do so, I'm going to right-click on the object and go to Assign New Material. Now you'll see that we have a lot of different options in our materials. Under Favorites, we have Blend and Lambert, Fong-E, but these materials will work best with Hardware 2.0 rendering and Maya software rendering. If we're going to use a different render engine, we may need a different type of material. Currently we're using Hardware 2.0, so I'll go ahead and choose a blend. Now you'll notice the difference in each of these. We're getting with a blend a highlight, whereas with a Lambert we don't. So let's go ahead and choose blend, and you'll see that when we do that, now I have a little bit of a highlight on my sphere. Let's go ahead and select this sphere and go to the Blend 1 node. As we talked about earlier, we have our color options, where I can choose whatever color I would like my sphere to be. And if I chose something like red, you'll see a couple of interesting things. Although I chose red, we're getting a little bit of blue lighting from our ambient light on this side, and a little bit of yellow lighting from our directional light on this side. So what Maya is doing is calculating the yellow light and how it interacts with a red object. Some of the other attributes in this blend material include transparency, if I would like this to be somewhat transparent, and a little lower down the material, you'll see specular shading. This is going to tell us a little bit more about how these highlights respond to the lighting. Specular usually refers to highlights. So you'll see eccentricity, and if I start to adjust that, the highlight's either going to get broader and more diffused, or if I take this number lower, the highlight will get very sharp. We also have specular roll-off, which will allow us to sort of increase the intensity of that highlight. If I'm going for something like a ceramic ball, now we kind of have something closer to that. Because Viewport 2.0 is a GPU renderer that is trying to render this scene as fast as it can, some of the things that will not actually work in this render is reflectivity. So even though this material has an option for reflectivity, we're never actually going to be able to see things reflected in Viewport 2.0 without having to do some pretty complicated tricks. So for right now, we're going to have to live with not having any reflectivity in this scene. Let's go ahead and put a new material on our cylinder. If I select my cylinder and right-click on it and say Assign New Materials, this time I'm going to choose a Fong-E. Now, Fong-E has a lot of similar attributes to Blend, including highlights, but you'll see that our specular options of how those highlights are generated is a little different. And so I can turn down my roughness. Let's try to get in an angle where we can see this highlight a little better. And I can turn up and down this highlight size in order to change this highlight that is going up and down the object. Again, I can add a color to my object, and if I want to choose something like yellow, maybe pull that back just a little bit. Now, let's imagine that whatever this yellow cylinder is made out of, that's also the same thing that this box is made out of. It's important to realize that these materials we've created exist as a separate entity from these models. And we can see all the materials in our scene by clicking this blue icon right here next to our render settings. If we click that, it's going to open our hypershade. Hypershade is where we can see and edit all of our materials. We'll be using it a little bit more in the future, but right now you'll see there is the Fong E shader that is applied to our cylinder. If I also wanted to apply it to our box, I could select the box and right click and say assign material to selection, and it would apply that yellow material to our box. Another way we could do that is to right click on the box and say assign existing material, and I could choose Fong E. A third way we could do this is to middle click the Fong E material and drag and drop it on our box. Rather than close our hypershade, I'm just going to drag it over to this other screen. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you about materials. Let's apply a new material to our floor. If I right click and say assign new material, I'm going to choose a Lambert material because for this one I don't want any highlights. And it doesn't look like very much change, but that's just because our new Lambert material is the same settings as our old Lambert material that already existed on the floor. And so you'll see if I change the color here to something like blue, now it changes. But let's say I don't want just a solid color. I don't just want a blue floor. What if I wanted tile on my floor? So that's where materials become much more powerful. In our Lambert 1 material, if you see out here at the end of our color, we have a little checkerboard. In fact, most of these attributes have a checkerboard. This checkerboard is a way of mapping in another node that will help drive this color. So for example, the wall in the room around you right now may just be painted a solid color, but outside there may be a wall that's made up out of brick. What color is brick? I could change this to red, but that doesn't look like brick, even if I try to make it more of an actual brick color. So how do I make this look like brick? The answer to that is in this little checkerboard, because I can very easily go outside and take a photograph of brick. When I click this checkerboard, this color is going to be driven by another attribute. So I'll click this, and you'll see that it gives me a lot of different options of what can drive this color. So for example, I could choose checker, and now it will drive it with this checkerboard pattern. This is a texture. The checkerboard pattern is a procedural texture, but you'll notice when I did that, I don't actually see the texture on the floor. So remember, 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, but 6 is textured. And of course 7 will bring back our shadows. So we're able to see this checkerboard texture on the floor now because we have added that texture to our Lambert 1 color channel. This checker pattern is procedural, which means if I don't like a black and white checkerboard and I want to make it a gray and red checkerboard, I can. Of course, I can also go outside and take a picture of brick, or I can take a picture of a tile pattern that I like in order to create a more realistic floor. However, this is probably a good place to warn you against some bad practices. So if I go to a browser, I'm currently using Chrome, and I just type in brick, you're going to see that under my Images tab, Google's going to bring me a near infinite list of photos of brick. It's very tempting to say, ooh, that's the brick I want, and just download that and use it. However, this brick belongs to someone, not necessarily this brick wall. This photograph of brick belongs to someone. So we have to consider copyright. Someone owns this image and it's most likely not you. The easiest way to get an image that you own is to just go take a picture of it yourself. A lot of people will say, it's not hurting anyone for me to download this image and use it in my art, but someday you're going to make art, and you don't want people saying that about your art, do you? What if someone downloaded an image that you drew and put it on a t-shirt without asking your permission? So we need to make sure that we're using images that we are allowed to use. Again, go take a picture yourself, or find a resource that gives you permission to use these images. Now, you may go follow this link and find out that this is one of those resources, but the easiest way is to just start at one of those resources. The one that is most notable is textures.com. Now, textures.com does have a premium version that you have to pay for, but you are allowed so many free images a day. So you'll have to create an account, but it's a free account. And just as long as you don't give them your credit card number, you shouldn't accidentally buy a bunch of textures. So I'm going to go ahead and log in with my account. And I'm just going to start looking at pictures of brick and tile. So I'm making a floor. So let's go ahead and choose floors. I like something like this. Let's try this. So if I click here, you'll see I'm starting to find all sorts of images. This looks pretty neat. So you'll see that I currently have 15 free credits, and if I want this image, it will cost me 2 of those credits. So you have to be careful how many images you download at once. But let's go ahead and download this medium one. And where should I put this? So this brings up a good question. As you'll remember, earlier we set our project to the bridge folder. So Maya is going to look there first for any textures you create. Now, if you save it somewhere else, we could make Maya go find that texture in a different location, but that could cause a lot of problems with organization later. So let's go to the bridge folder, and under source images, I'm just going to save it here, and I'll go ahead and call this tile. Save. Now I currently have my checkerboard mapped into color. I want to undo that. I can do that by right-clicking on color and saying break connection. And you'll see now it just goes back to a default color. If I go back to my checkerboard pattern and choose file, then now it will create a new node that is looking for an image. And if I choose this folder, you'll see that it takes me immediately to my source images folder and my bridge project. The reason it did that was because I set my project. If you didn't set your project, it's untelling where it's going to go looking for this file. So let's make sure that we set our project before we do this. And then when I select tile and hit open, now you'll see that I have a tile as my color texture for the floor. Just for a minute, I'm going to go ahead and drag my hypershade back over so we can see what this material looks like. If I choose the Lambert 2 material and I right click and say Graph Network, you'll see that it shows me the entire material here. So our Lambert 2 material is this. And this Lambert 2 SG, that's the shading group. So don't worry about that too much right now. But where we were able to adjust our color is this node. You'll see that the tile.jpg is connected into my color node, and my place 2D texture is connected into my UV coordinates. Don't worry too much about UVs right now. Just know that UVs are how Maya knows how to place the texture onto the object. This is a really powerful way of looking at this because, as I said earlier, many of these different items can have something mapped into them, including transparency. If I wanted to map in my color into my transparency, I could do that, and you'll see that it uses the black and white colors from my image to generate transparency on my object. Can't really see it very well in Viewport 2.0. So this allows us to do different things with a single image within our material.